Yeah. So I don't have a formal presentation.
Oh,
I
then
have
you're
so
good.
much stuff all over all over the web. I thought I would just
Awesome.
share you know, a few things with you. So let me know, did you want me to just go ahead and get started with an introduction of myself, or how did you
Yeah.
want to do the format this evening?
No, an
Okay.
introduction would be great.
All right. Okay, great. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me this afternoon or evening or wherever, whatever time zone it is that you're in today. My name is Christa Bailey. I am a librarian at San José State University. I cover College of Business, Accounting and Finance, and Marketing and Decision Sciences. They changed the names, so I always have to think about that. So, and then also Economics and Psychology. So I've been in my current position since 2016, and I'm really proud of the fact that I just achieved tenure this fall. So you actually find out about it in spring semester, and then it's sort of like goes into effect in with the start of the academic year. So, in addition to my regular responsibilities, I also co-coordinate the Affordable Learning Solutions Initiative on campus. So, I think I would like to share that with you. So, let me go ahead and open up this screen. So this is the Affordable Learning Solutions Initiative at San Jose State. I, I just want to front load this because I think it's just such a valuable program, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. So there is the Affordable Learning Solutions Initiative exists at all 23 CSU campuses, and it's administered different ways across all of the campuses at our institution. We're very fortunate that we have two librarians that head it, and as a matter of fact, since its inception in 2012, 2013, it's always resided in the library. Our goal is to make college more affordable for students by replacing costly textbooks with more affordable options, as you can see here. So we work with faculty to convert courses to more affordable options, open educational resources, or using library materials, for example. My colleague, Adriana Poe, helps me co-coordinate it. She's actually going up for tenure this year, so that's very exciting. We, a few years ago, pre-pandemic, did a digital storytelling contest, and you can see one of our stories here. So we feel that this is really impactful when you hear the student side of it. And so this is one of our undergraduates who shared their story. This is a little bit out of date. I will say that it's interesting that if there's any silver lining to the pandemic, it's that textbook costs for the first time in 21, 22, I believe it is, actually went down. And otherwise, I would be sitting here telling you about how textbook costs have increased and have outpaced inflation by more than 1,000% in the last 20 to 30 years. Anyway, so this is one of my roles at the university. And if I were doing an instruction session for you today, I would take you out. I would say, please join me in going to the library homepage, library.sjsu.edu. And then if you ever want to reach out to me, and I want to also share this with all of you listening, you're welcome to reach out to me and ask any questions you have. By the way, while I'm speaking, please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. But if you ever want to reach out to me, easy way to do so is to go to the middle of the page beneath the search box, scroll down to research guides, use the drop down here, and let's go to psychology. You can click go, and this is one of my research guides. And you can easily reach out to me either through email, or if you wanted to schedule a one-on-one research consult with me, you're welcome to do that as well. So this is one of the things I'm responsible for as an academic librarian at San Jose State, creating these research guides to support my students. I typically highlight what I think are the best databases and resources depending on the discipline. So that's just a quick overview of what I do. Day to day, as I mentioned, I do instruction sessions. So as I was saying, I think at the start, I sort of lost count, but I think tomorrow is my 11th or 12th instruction session since the start of the new semester. I'm also responsible for maintaining collections across the various areas of my responsibility. I have research consultations with students. I'm currently part of the RISCA assigned time program, which means I have a release time from my reference desk duties in order to conduct research. So that's sort of a brief overview of what I do. I'll go ahead and stop sharing that. So do you have any questions? I guess is a good place to start.
I guess one question would be what guided you to SJSU slash did you always know you wanted to work at an academic library?
That's a great question. So when I was finishing up my undergrad degree, I have a degree in psychology. I thought I was going to go to grad school for psychology. Sort of had a strange interaction with one of my faculty members, I would say 6 weeks before I graduated. And he really discouraged me actually from going to grad school. And this is someone that I had taken many classes from, and I actually had gone in and was approaching him for a letter of recommendation. So I was really disappointed. And I thought, well, if psychology doesn't want me, I don't want it, right? And I decided to try a different path. At the time, I'd been working in the undergraduate library, actually, the whole time I was in college. And once I graduated, I heard that there was going to be a position open. And so I went ahead and applied, and I was, I got the job. So throughout my career in academic libraries, I've actually been in many different roles. I started upon graduating, a few months after graduating from college, in the technical services unit. So I was a copy cataloger, which was kind of interesting, a little monotonous sometimes maybe, but I'm a very detail oriented person. I like to pay attention to little details. And so I enjoyed that. I did that for a number of years. And as I worked with all these materials, I realized I really wanted to have the opportunity to do more research. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. I mean, that was the goal of going to like grad school for me, was I wanted to do research. So from there, I transitioned to another job across campus at the law library at Santa Clara University, and I managed their circulation staff students. And so that gave me an opportunity to sort of have managerial experience. I realized I don't think I really want to be a manager, but it was an interesting experience. But so again, it was another piece of the puzzle. And then I went actually to San José State for a while, and I worked in their acquisitions department ordering materials. So that was kind of fun. I enjoyed that a lot. That gave me the opportunity to manage budgets and to see yet another piece of the puzzle behind the scenes of how libraries are run. And then I returned to Santa Clara University and spent I think about 7 to 9 years in the research and instruction unit. And that's where everything kind of came together for me. I was able to sit on the reference desk. I actually was in government publications. So I did lots of work with government documents. I had the opportunity to learn a lot I had wonderful mentors. I got the opportunity to present with my colleagues at different conferences. And when I was there, I realized if I really want to follow this path and do more research, I'm going to have to get an advanced degree. And so, and I didn't want to leave academic, although public libraries at times have kind of been a little bit of a pull or interest for me. I didn't want to leave academic. I like the rhythm of the school year. I like, having summers that are a little more relaxed and then somehow vanish. You don't know where the time went. I really enjoyed, having a little break around the end of the year. I just enjoyed working in that kind of environment and seeing that, how the energy changed on campus throughout the school year. So I really wanted to stay in academics, and I realized that this was a great opportunity for me to go back and get my master's, and then I could start pursuing more research. So when I graduated in 2012, it took me a couple of years to find my first quote unquote professional job. Although at Santa Clara University, I had been working for all intents and purposes, right? Like I had been working as a librarian at the reference desk, but there wasn't a position open there. So I took a position at a small graduate school in North San Jose. And there I worked with a very defined population of students from engineering and business. And I started helping build their library, and this position came up at San Jose State. And I just thought, oh, this is so great. And one of the things you have to do when you apply was write your research statement. And so that really gave me an opportunity to think about, well, what do I want to research? And that's how I ended up at San Jose State. It was too good of an opportunity to pass up because there was so many different things that I was excited about. And it's a tenure track position. Not all of our positions are tenure track, but it was really wonderful that this was a tenure track position. And to be honest, one of the things that inspired me was I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to see if I could reach, set out that goal and then achieve that milestone. Could I make it? So that's a long way around to get to answer your question. That's really was research is what I wanted to pursue.
What ultimately was your research question that you decided upon?
So I was really at the beginning, I was really interested in information literacy. And I had been working with my colleague, my mentor at Santa Clara University. We'd been doing a lot of different approaches, sort of approaching gamification of InfoLit. And we were trying to look, we had a big question, which was looking at how library instruction can support students in the integration of information resources in their papers. So when we started a project, unfortunately, it never was completed just because of many different factors that were outside of our control. But we looked at papers from students who had long gone, and we looked at the rubrics that the instructors had, and we were looking to see how did students work with the rubric around information literacy and embedding those particular resources in their papers. So we did a lot of reading of papers, and it was interesting. It was very interesting. It was great practice. And I took that question into San Jose State, and that was really going to be my goal, the integration of resources through information literacy sessions. But ultimately, when you're working on a tenure track position, sometimes it's very hard to continue with your original question. Sometimes you just sort of have to follow down those paths that present themselves to you. So really my question of research shifted, and I've really been focusing on open educational resources and the impact it makes on students. So really I took the ALS perspective, and we have presented at conferences on that. So I have done some work here and there on my InfoLit question, but we also at San Jose State don't really have a system set up where information literacy is embedded in certain classes, right? It's more right now the relationship that faculty have with us, and then working individually one-on-one with faculty. You don't quite have that lockstep, okay, we're going to, for example, we don't have a credit class on InfoLit at San Jose State right now, where some, I think East Bay has that. One of my colleagues is working with their department to get a credit class into the curriculum for that particular department. So it's a little bit different approach. So there's not really a holistic way right now to analyze InfoLit for the undergraduate student body.
Would you mind explaining for those of us that don't know, like, what is the difference between tenure track and not, and like, how does that work basically?
Yeah, sure. So tenure track, that we're very fortunate at San Jose State that librarians have faculty status. Not all academic librarians across the nation have that. Oftentimes, librarians will have a different status than staff. Sometimes they call it academic status. So it just depends on what institution you're at. At our institution, we have the same responsibilities of traditional teaching faculty. So when I went up for tenure, I was analyzed on 3 different areas. One was my teaching assignment or my academic assignment, which primarily involved my teaching. The second was my service. And the third was what we call RISCA, which is your research, scholarship, and creative activity output. And you have to achieve certain levels of success at each of these areas in order to achieve tenure. And it's the same for teaching faculty if they're in business, poli-sci, psychology. Each set of departments has their own guidelines, but we also have policies set by the Senate at the university that we have to adhere by, right? So there's some emphasis on publishing in peer-reviewed journals, so that can be an issue, making sure you're achieving those marks. We also have adjunct faculty, so some adjunct faculty, particularly in my College of Business, they also publish, but adjunct faculty, typically publishing and research is not part of the job requirements per se. So that's the difference between tenure track and adjunct lecturers, part-time. All of those words are interchangeable, the same for those faculty at that classification.
Who would you say that you primarily serve on a day-to-day basis? I know you mentioned some of this already, but do you mostly interface with undergraduates?
I would say 80% of my clientele are undergraduates, 20% are graduates. We have I have very active relationships with my graduate faculty in psychology and actually also College of Business. So I would say, yeah, primarily my clientele are undergraduate students.
I know, or another question I have was, for anybody who is looking to enter academic librarianship, is there anything in particular that you think would be useful for any of us who would be looking for that path? Like, for example, were there any classes, any specific outside of class experiences that you thought were useful for you?
I would say I was very fortunate that I had work experience. So I say if you can get an internship so you can experience being in an academic environment to see if that's what you want to do. I don't know that there are any classes in particular. I don't know. I know some people don't like reference, but I think I took a couple of reference classes and that was very helpful. That really, although I had on the job training and experience, I have to say around the research component, those reference classes really introduced me to so many more resources than I would have necessarily found on my own. So depending on your interest, I felt that I should have probably taken more collection development classes, but in hindsight, I don't think it's been an issue because collection development, largely due to budgetary issues, is not something I spend a tremendous amount of time on in my job. It's certain times of the year that we really focus on it. And I don't feel that I have been hindered, right, by not taking those classes. So, but I would say if you can get some experience, volunteering. Academic libraries usually don't take volunteers, unfortunately, but if that is an opportunity, absolutely take it. But internships would be great.
Can I have ask a follow-up question? Did you
Yeah.
take anything about instruction too? I've seen that kind of as another set of classes. Like there seems to be reference and collection development and then like instruction sorts of classes. Or was that something you kind of figured out on your own?
I did take a class in instruction. I want to say, is it Info 250? Do we still have that? Does that sound right? Okay. So I took that class. I liked it a lot. Yeah, there are certain things though that being in class can't teach you. It's interesting. It's interesting to spend time with teaching faculty too, like regular teaching faculty at an institution. One of the things that one of the faculty once said, which I really related to, is when you go into an instruction session. So very often it's as though you're a guest speaker, right? You come in for one class session. Typically, they talk about the one shot, right? And lots of library literature. So you come in sort of as a guest speaker. The instructor has had lots of time getting to know these students, so you don't necessarily know. First of all, oftentimes you may not know what types of instruction they've had before. So you don't know if you're talking to a student that's had 3 library instruction sessions or they've had 0. So that's one of the reasons I've really moved into now doing some pre-assessment with my classes, which has really helped a lot. But it's interesting, and I heard a teaching instructor once say, it's a little like a performance. It's a little like going in and, it's a little like a play, right? There is sometimes, and I think it's for anyone, for me in particular, I consider myself an introvert. So having to get up and stand in front of students and talk to them for 75 minutes is not exactly what I dream. Like, this is not every morning, like, yes, I can't wait. It's not really my thing, right? But you get used to it, and it does help if you think of it as a little bit of a performance, like sort of adopt an alter ego, if you will. And there is sometimes a little bit of adrenaline that comes with that. And it was interesting to hear even teaching faculty talk about that. And even with the pandemic, when we came back, that was very honest. I met with one of my, it was a psych grad class and I told them I had not been in the classroom for more than 500 days. It was like something like 530 some odd days. I'd not been live in front of students, and I was teaching in a mask. And I was sort of commiserating with the instructor. He said, the first time he walked into class wearing a mask and teaching, it was hard to catch his breath. And he felt, a little breathless, and it was really interesting. And the students, I think, appreciate that, when you can tell them your perspective and try to make that connection with them as quickly as possible. I've worked a lot more on trying to reveal more personal details, right? Like more of my personality rather than just being someone up there who, yeah, just, but it is a challenge sometimes. But I was getting back to your question. I think it was Info 250 that I took, and it was great. I see there is a question in the chat. Is it okay if I read it? Do you mind?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
I'd love to hear more about Christa's library instruction experience, and inquiring this one still an MLIS student or in a position where you're not yet a professional librarian. That's fantastic. She was able to work on the instruction reference side of libraries while getting her MLIS. Are there many paraprofessional positions like this? I was very fortunate that my colleagues trusted me enough and brought me into the classroom with them. And I was still considered a paraprofessional. And then at time, I actually taught a class on my own when I was a paraprofessional, now that I think about that. So I think if you can get into the right environment and you can get a mentor, which is interesting to me. Sometimes I feel, I'm not quite sure why in libraries I don't see more mentorship. That is something I would like to see more of. Yeah, so if you get into the right environment, I think it is possible to have these experiences. And I would also say, ask. If you're a paraprofessional somewhere right now, reach out to those colleagues in the reference and instruction or research and instruction or whatever they call it at your institution, and ask if you can just sit in their classroom. Ask if you can observe them. One of the things we have to do for tenure is we're actually evaluated by our peers, our colleagues, every year, every academic year. So when I submitted my dossier, I had 6 letters of observation from my colleagues. So they come into my classroom when I do my session, and they observe me, and then they write a letter. It's very interesting because I also have to go and observe my colleagues as well. So it goes both ways. So not only do you learn from hearing about someone else, about yourself, about your teaching, but then you also get to learn from your colleagues when you go into their classroom for observation purposes. And you can learn and see different strategies that folks use. And it is different for different disciplines, I would say, too. That's something else that's really interesting. If you can, try to observe instruction sessions in different disciplines to see how the instruction changes across the discipline.
So, hi, Christa. I have a question. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but I have a question about particularly about affordable learning solutions. And do you have any success stories or just examples on how the affordable learning solutions program has benefited students at our university? And secondly, what's the most effective in achieving cost savings for students?
Sure. So I'm really pleased to report that we estimate we've saved now a little over $4 million for students with the program. We believe we've achieved reaching out to more than 30,000 students. We have more than 200 faculty that have flipped classes through the program. It's an interesting challenge because, of course, you always have new students coming in. So you have to introduce them to your program, right? And then unfortunately, sometimes your ambassadors, if you will, students who are really thought highly of the program, sadly graduate, which is both great because that's what we want them to do, but then also a little sad because you have someone who's been such a great supporter. One of the things that we did, we were one of the first CSUs to implement student ambassadors. So that has been really successful. We're in the process now of hiring a new student ambassador this fall because our ambassadors have graduated. And I think that's one of the key things to particularly getting undergraduate students on board, which is our first student ambassador, one of our first student ambassadors, Jennifer, was wonderful about making connections across campus. So she made connections with Peer Connections, which is a group that also supports students in their learning. She had a great connection with Associated Students, who, by the way, also for undergraduates has their own bookstore or their own textbook voucher program. So we support their program by promoting that to students on all of our handouts and on our website. We let students know. Students do need to be on financial aid to take advantage of that. But that's a great resource. We also talk about students speaking to their faculty. So that's another great way to drive home the impact of lowering textbook costs for students. So Jennifer was wonderful. She would go in and she would talk to her faculty and she would introduce them to open educational resources and say, think about maybe just introducing something as a supplementary text. Don't think about having to redo your entire course syllabus, right? To integrate these new materials. Just think about introducing something, and so that sort of gets faculty interested. There was a lot of faculty interest in making college more affordable for students. And now that we have course reading lists that can be embedded directly from the library into the Canvas course shell, faculty are really interested in making the most out of, for example, journal articles, ebooks that we have in our collection. I'll go ahead and go back out to the library homepage. I'll show you one of the things that our program is most associated with probably is the e-textbook list, as we call it. So beneath, again, the OneSearch search box, the affordable textbooks icon, if you go ahead and click on that, that will take you to textbooks available as ebooks in the library. And each semester, we obtain a list of materials that are assigned by the bookstore. We check that list against our ebook holdings. If there is a match, we go ahead and add this title to our list. This has grown over the years, although we do not have representation from every single department, unfortunately, I think we have really done a good job of broadening the reach of this particular program. We're now sending out emails at the start of each semester, letting faculty know that this is an option. So the great thing about this particular resource for students is that we try our hardest to obtain unlimited user licenses, meaning, for example, all of us in this meeting right now could open up one of these titles and begin reading together. So we don't have to worry about titles being checked out from under us, right? We don't have to worry about getting this book back on time to the library so someone else can check it out. So students have these materials day one of class, which is also really key to making sure that the program is successful. When students have their resources day one, we know that they're more likely to stick with the class and they're less likely to drop it. So this is one of the things that our program in particular has been recognized for. As a matter of fact, actually, we have applied for an RFP. So each spring we apply for funding from the chancellor's office, and they have asked us to go after certain goals. And now San Jose State has become one of the models for one of the goals that they encourage other institutions to create textbooks with from the ebook holdings in their library. So we're really proud of this. This has been going on for a number of years. And this, in addition to flipping courses to traditional OER, already existing OER, this has been really successful in helping us achieve a greater savings across the board.
Thank you, Christa, for sharing this. This is wonderful. All the numbers that you have provided, also, it's very, very promising. Is there any online resources we can find those numbers? Is there any blog or any posts that we can just read through?
So we've been highlighted in a few publications. Let me see, because I think it would be nice if you could see the entire CSU as a whole. Let me track down from the chancellor's office. Let me see if I can find some reports for you, because I think you might like to see that. So let me just write myself a note here real quick. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That would be wonderful. Yeah, that would be a great resource for all of us.
Yeah.
And
are those tangerines?
Meanwhile, I have another question about affordable learning solutions. Where do you see the future of affordable learning solutions evolving in higher education?
That's a great question. I think one of our challenges right now is addressing that almost every major publisher has an arm within the OER landscape. So Cengage, Macmillan, Cengage in particular is pretty active on college campuses. And there is some programs that some institutions around their ALS programs pursue. We haven't pursued it quite as much at San Jose State, but there's things like first day access. They're called different things, but the idea is that students can, it's almost like a Netflix model now for textbooks, that if you subscribe, for example, to a Cengage membership, you can get all of your textbooks for like a flat fee, right? Say $129 for that semester. And then you're welcome to pull as many Cengage books from their collection as you need. The issue with that is, what are the chances, though, that a student is going to have all Cengage textbooks, right? All of their instructors are going to assign Cengage textbooks. So I think that's a challenge. It also formally was opt-in, and in some institutions now it's opt-out. So students may not realize that unless they opt out, they're going to be charged this additional fee. But again, if they need those books that are assigned on that platform, then, you know, what do you do? So we run, at the start of the semester, we run our textbook help days, which we call #Don'tGoTextbookBroke. and we set up tables in the library. We used to do it in front of the library, but now we're in the library in kind of like the main traffic area, high traffic area. We offer students coffee and drinks and snacks to bring them in and ask them, have you bought your textbooks yet? Here, do you know about these resources? Do you know about the library? Do you know about the bookstore credit? And then sometimes they'll say to me, oh, well, I have to get this like MindTap package or something like that. Can you find me an alternative? And I have to say, oh, you know what? I'd love to, but depending on what package your instructor is using, I can't direct you to another resource, because if your homework is assigned to that or your test, I want you to be successful. I can't tell you, don't get it, right? Because it could be really, really valuable to your academic success. So that's a challenge, I think, right now, which is looking to see what's going to happen with major publishers. Mm-hmm. Also, in some cases, because traditionally OER did not include the ancillaries that faculty really like. So, for example, PowerPoint slides, test banks, etc. One of the things that has happened in the OER space is that commercial vendors will take the OER, add all the bells and whistles, and then give it back to faculty or students at a small cost, right? So I have sometimes an issue with that. Ethically, I think, well, these materials were intended to be freely available for students, and now you're asking them to pay something for them. So I think this is where we're going to continue to see growth, because it's appealing to faculty, understandably. But I also think that there's been a lot of movement in the OER space to authors actually including these types of resources that are of interest to faculty. So hopefully commercial entities won't be able to come in and kind of gobble up this area, because those resources will be available to faculty. There are large grants available from the U.S. Department of Education. So for example, there's a huge OER repository called LibreText that comes out of UC Davis. And they were given a $5 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education a few years ago. And so this is a very robust OER resource in the science area. So I think that it originally started within chemistry. So it's interesting because a lot of STEM resources are really great for OER. They're kind of ripe for OER, right? Like they're wonderful resources to go out and get. The challenge sometimes can be in more traditional areas like classics. So sometimes humanities and English classes can be a bit of a challenge for us, trying to find like anthologies and things like that that instructors would like to assign. So I think that's where we're going to see, I would love to see more growth in OER resources in those areas. And again, what's going to happen and continue to happen in the landscape with the major publishers. Mm-hmm. So.
And following up with this topic again, what advice would you like to? I mean, would you have to give to faculty and institutions? I mean, to our institution in particular, looking to implement similar initiative to make education more affordable.
Around OER or other
around OER and implementing OER more. Moving forward.
Oh, okay. Moving forward and trying to get more OER in the classroom. That's a great question. Sometimes I feel like I just need to do a better job of marketing it. I just need more hours in the day, more time. For myself, one of the reasons that I was, and Adriana as well, but we were really excited about the student ambassador position is I feel like we need to raise awareness in the student body, because I think that's where, because students have so much more impact maybe than I think they realize. And not only that, I hope that students will be advocates for themselves. When we do instruction, I want students to think critically. And so I want them to be able to take advantage of all the resources that their education, particularly San José State, there's so many resources that are available to them. And I think your educational experience is what you make of it. So for myself, it's to continue pushing that sort of grassroots effort to make students aware. It's fascinating when you do a student survey and you ask them, we've done this a lot at, when we've tabled out on 7th Street pre-pandemic, we would have a total board, right? And we'd ask students, if you were not paying for expensive textbooks, what would you spend your money on? And it's rent, it's gas, it's food, and what I think what instructors don't expect to see up there, but it almost always makes at least the 4th or 5th spot in our list of things they would pay for: additional education. They say, I would pay for more classes, more online classes. So I think it's twofold. One, that sort of grassroots movement. Two, to continue to educate faculty, to let them know that I think it's sometimes faculty just don't realize that the actual cost of a textbook. And when you sit down and work with them, they say, oh my gosh, my textbook's $300 and this is for one class. Your student now has to go out and do this for like 3 other classes, right? So that's where I think we will continue to make progress.
This may have been covered, but I noticed that Marissa had asked if we knew of OER adoption rates on campus, like if it's been increasing with faculty that you've noticed possibly since the pandemic, I would guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually a question we need to get back to. Pre-pandemic, we did a presentation. You're welcome. Thank you. We did a survey of faculty who had been in our program, and we wanted to see what was keeping them in the program, which is really funny because our original question was, what caused faculty to leave? And our numbers in our survey were surprising. I think it was over 90% of faculty, once they adopted OER, they continued using OER. So we actually had to flip it. We did not get the results we anticipated. We need to go back and do another round of surveying at this point because the pandemic absolutely impacted and kind of threw us for a loop. While it was great that it enabled us to, so publishers, I will say, were fairly kind during the pandemic, right? We had far more resources that were available to students online. There was a huge rush. I remember in March 2020, how many of us were just working as fast as we could to get these resources in the catalog, right? To get them, to let students know that things were online and available to them. I would say pre-pandemic, I don't know the whole numbers in terms of adoption, but I would say pre-pandemic, we did start to see a little bit of fall off. And I think that coming into this more endemic stage, we're going to see now a upswing in adoption, only because faculty realize that they could teach with these types of resources. It may have not been their preferred method of delivery of resources, but that they could do it and that students were successful. So, which reminds me, you know what? If you give me one moment, I would like to pull up a slide for you on OER. So if you don't mind, let me pull up some numbers for you.
Sure thing.
Okay, thanks. So let me pull that up real quickly. Let me get out of my screen. Okay, so this was a presentation that I did for online educational resources in SJSU Online. But what I wanted to show you was, and I apologize, the skipping through these, but this is what I wanted to show you, why open matters. So student learning is impacted by course material access. Studies show that 93% of students who use OER do as well or better than those using traditional materials, since they have easy access to the content starting on day one of the course. So that's what I was mentioning. It's so important to have access to this on day one. And here's the second piece I wanted to show you. During academic year 2021-22, about 1 in 4 students skipped purchasing at least one class resource. Those who did were more likely to consider leaving school. So let me see, I think I have student spending. So according to the National Association of College Stores in academic year 21-22, average student spending on course materials was the lowest in 24 years since the organization had started tracking this data. And then although students tended to acquire more materials than in years past, this could be explained by an increase in the number of free or not directly paid for course materials reported by students. So I thought that these statistics were so fascinating to me, right? So this part here, this is, I think, what's going to continue to drive adoption. Because not only, again, if you get into students at the grassroots level and students are interested in having materials day one electronically, faculty see that the students aren't impacted academically by it. This is, as I said, maybe perhaps the one silver lining that came out of the pandemic for us as an institution. But I think this will continue to help drive interest in materials. So,
Christa, these
yeah,
are
but
great resources. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. What was I going to say? Let me see. I would love to see. Let me do some research and dig through my numbers and see what I have in terms of adoption rate amongst faculty. Also make a note of that. It probably is not current, like I said, because the pandemic really impacted us. So, but I can see what I can find.
It has been like one of the other things that I've noticed just by interviewing people is like, or talking in general, is like another thing that became more normalized, I guess, is remote learning and working. Like obviously the iSchool has kind of been ahead of the curve in that anyway, because it already was fully remote and fully online before everyone had to scramble to figure that out. But it has been interesting and cool to see when workspaces have chosen to keep that versus the many, unfortunately, that have tried to scale that back afterwards and like throw the baby out with the bathwater, in my opinion, as far as that goes. So this is back to like being a subject matter librarian, but was there, so like you obviously you had your undergrad degree. Do people generally come with a certain background if they want to fit into a certain subject? Like I would kind of guess that would be the case, or how does that work, generally speaking?
So I think like anything else, there are trends, even librarianship. So my understanding is maybe 10 or more years ago, that was the preference. I think even at our institution at San José State, the preference was to hire librarians who had, in some cases, not only an undergraduate, but maybe even a master's degree in a particular area, right? And then they would be lined up with that particular discipline. But I don't think, and certainly the last 7 years that I've been there, I haven't seen that. I think that I was fortunate in that one of our previous deans started to wanted to move towards that, kind of methodology of let's align people with where they have their degrees. But a lot of librarians have degrees in English. And so I think if I were to take a poll with my colleagues, there's probably at least, I can think of at least 3, if not more, or 5 maybe, that have degrees in English. and we only have one English department, right? So
Right.
it becomes a challenge to getting people into the right place and space. So there may be a preference for that in the future. We may come full circle and it may be going forward. Some institutions may want that. Now, if you want to go into a law library, that's different, right? Typically, you have to have both an MLIS and a JD. So that's, and they definitely want you to have that experience. I know colleagues who worked at law libraries that had the MLIS or were offered a position and obtained their JD while they were working in the library. But that's oftentimes that I've heard of a condition of employment. So that's a little bit different. But no, I find that right now, again, this may change, but where we're at right now, it seems like folks are just being hired and sort of, learn as they go along, or maybe they have an interest in an area. So it would seem that you would have to have a specific degree to work with a specific population or discipline, but that isn't always necessarily the case. And I definitely wouldn't let I would encourage folks not to let themselves be discouraged if they were going for a job and they felt that they didn't have, oh, I don't have the exact degree they want. I wouldn't, I'd still go for it. Don't be put off by that. You'd be surprised because a lot of times too, it's preferred. What does that mean, preferred? So there's all kinds of preferences, but it's interesting, again, to see what kind of job pool you get. So don't be discouraged by it.
I have also heard that in some cases, librarians have had one subject that they were overseeing and then have been given other subjects over time. Like potentially they've narrowed down the number of subject librarians to being like, now you're in charge of multiple. Have you noticed that, or has that been your experience?
Yeah, so my subject areas have changed. When I first started, I had hospitality management, I had economics, I had accounting and finance, I did have marketing. I think that's what I started with. And then as I felt so hospitality management is a very small discipline, and they actually were originally in the College of, I think it was, now we call it CHES, which is like Health and Human Services or something like that, which coming from a government documents background, I always want to call it whatever that unit is in the government. So I tend to get that department wrong, and I don't support anything in there right now. So you have to forgive me if I name them incorrectly. It's just because I always pull from the government documents experience. But when a new librarian was hired and my former colleague in business was retiring, I gave up hospitality management and went to an incoming librarian. I picked up GIL, which is Global Innovation and Leadership. So then I had 3 areas and economics. So I had, so accounting and finance, marketing, and business analytics, and GIL, Global Innovation and Leadership, and then economics. And then that changed again when my colleague became a coordinator for an area and had to give up psychology. So they came to me and said, would you be interested in taking psychology? I said, yes, absolutely. But I cannot keep all my current areas because the teaching load is just going to kill me. Right? I can't keep it up. So I had to give up GIL, unfortunately, which I really enjoyed. I had wonderful friendships and relationships with my faculty colleagues there, but my fantastic librarian colleague took it over and she has a great time with it. And then I took over psychology. So it's not uncommon. So that actually I've changed a lot. And that was one of the things I was concerned about when you're going up for tenure. When you have so many changes, you have to approach it in such a way so it doesn't seem like, well, what the heck is she doing? Why does this woman keep changing all these different subject areas, right? But in fact, it was responding to the needs of my institution. So I was just, that's what I just leaned in on my dossier narrative, which was I responded and stepped up to the needs of my institution, happy to do so. But it can be, as someone in that position, it can be a little nerve-wracking when you do change your, when you change your areas, your specialties. Also, sometimes faculty or teaching faculty respond and they'll say, "Oh, you're the 7th librarian we've had in like 3 years. Why do you keep changing? Why do So you have to sort of be sensitive to them as well, which I understand. They want to have continuity too, and they want to have a relationship with their librarian. So depending on if you're an institution that's doing lots of different changes, it's stressful for both us librarian and can be stressful for your faculty you're supporting as well. So that's an interesting perspective. And if you have great relationships with them, sometimes they're sad, they're disappointed that now we have to start all over again with a new person, which we all understand. It's like being the new kid in school, right? When you pick up a new subject area, that's how you feel. It's like, oh, I have to go meet all these new faculty now, and I had such a great time with these folks, and I miss them. And so it's a little bit of a growing pain experience to go through that.
That's really interesting and not something I would have even really thought about before.
Yeah.
We have a question. We have a question on the chat.
Sorry.
In job postings, I've noticed specific OER librarian jobs. Is this a position that you think will be in growing demand? Yes and no, because I've also seen that too. We actually had that at our institution. We had a specific OER librarian, and then her job positions morphed and changed, and she doesn't have that specific title anymore. I think it will, I hate to say this, but I think it's going to depend on the institution. And that's what it comes back to. I think some institutions will absolutely go for a full OER librarian subject specialist just in and of itself. And then some institutions like ours are going to say, we just don't have the capacity to hire someone to just do that. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break it up. So we're going to maybe ask you to be part-time OER librarian and full-time whatever psychology or something like that. So I think we're going to continue to see a split. I think there is an interest, and I think coming out of the pandemic with so many resources available online, it makes sense. I'm hoping we'll continue to see this trend, but I don't know if it will be sustainable for certain libraries. So I think it's going to come down to the institutions. You're welcome.
For people that are like graduated or preparing to graduate and looking for academic positions, what would you recommend they look out for when, like, because there are so many jobs out there, like potentially like so many job boards, like is there like anything in particular you think we should look out for when applying, whether it's like you would consider a red or green flag, or just generally like something that might be expected for like an interview or anything like that?
Let's see. I think it's always interesting for me to go into a meeting with the folks you'll be working with to see what their group dynamic is. So I always think that's very interesting. I tell my students when they go out, don't forget you're interviewing the institution as well. Not only are they interviewing you, but you're interviewing the institution. And to keep that in mind, do you feel that your desires and goals are aligned with this particular institution? Could you see yourself growing in that position? Look and see. I always like to look and see, like, for myself personally, what kind of turnover do they have? Like if you're going to be the third business librarian in 2 years, why is that? Ask yourself why is that? Is it just, now there does tend to be lately a lot of churn kind of in higher ed in general, but you tend to see that more kind of in the upper like like academic vice presidents and maybe presidents and things. I don't know, even in the CSU, you see provosts and vice presidents and presidents and, people moving around quite a bit. That almost seems to kind of be normal, but typically librarians tend to kind of stay put. That was one of the reasons I had a hard time getting a job at Santa Clara is everybody just stayed there. They got their job and then they stayed there. I work with folks who'd been there 12 years, 20 years, 25 years. So I think that speaks to both kind of good and bad, right? It's like, well, are these people so happy there, or are they just so entrenched in their job that they don't want to leave? So I think that's what I mainly look for, is to do your research. It's like a good researcher that all of you are. Find out as much as you can about the institution. Find out about the dynamics of the group you'll be working with. Ask about what would a typical day look like. I think that's what I'd like to know. What would my typical day look like? Or what do the typical days look like for the colleagues that I'd be working with? Those are some of the things that come to mind. I guess if you're the people interviewing, you got into a big fight in the middle of your interview, that might not be good. But, those are the obvious things I think of. So. Or maybe they're just having a healthy intellectual discourse. So.
I have heard that that academic interviews can be quite a marathon for a library position or any position. Yeah. I partly bring it up because I only know that because somebody told me that, and I'm not sure that's something that everybody just knows is going to be the case.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. So when I interviewed for my position, I started at, I think, 8:30. I had a meeting with my hiring committee. So I think it was 4 members of the hiring committee. And then I moved into, so maybe, yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I should describe what it typically is like, or what it was when I was hired. So I then went into a meeting with, I think, the people I was going to be working with. And then I just rolled through the day of just different meetings. I had to give a presentation. So if instruction is going to be part, I would say even now for our candidates, all of our candidates, even if they're going to be in technical services or whatever we call that now, almost everyone is asked to do a presentation. So that's pretty typical. Used to be they would take you out to lunch. So I had then lunch with certain members from all over the library too. It wouldn't just be the group I would be working with. Then you'd roll into the afternoon with more meetings, right? Specific meetings with your, I don't know, like some committee, right? Different people from different departments. Ultimately, you might meet with whoever your dean or chair is. So if you're in an academic environment where you have like an associate university librarian, you probably would have perhaps a one-on-one, or if you had 3 AULs, you might meet with all those 3 together. You would have time to meet with the university librarian or the head of the library or the dean, I imagine. And then at the end of my day, they don't do this anymore, but they took me out to dinner, and I had dinner with the dean at the time and her second in command, who was the like the AUL at that time. So it was long. I think I got back to my car at 8 o'clock, 7:30. It was a long day. Yeah. And I've actually heard of 2-day interviews at some institutions. So now the good thing is, oh, go ahead.
I was just say, I'm like, is it, because you keep saying you go into different meetings, do people come with different questions for you, or is it like, yeah, is it like you're being interviewed every time more people come, or you're shifted around or whatever?
Yeah, you're expected to be able to answer different questions every time. In some cases, for example, if someone were on your hiring committee, you might see them 3 times that day, depending on which groups they're in. So of course, if they're a librarian, you're going to see them when you meet with your group of librarians. So they tend to probably not say as much, in that meeting with you because they may have seen you again. This may be the third time that they've seen you. And it becomes a joke. They'll say, hi, I've seen you many times today. How are you holding up? How are you doing? And then, they'll even say like, I'm not going to ask a lot of questions because I've already had 55 minutes with her or something like that. So you are expected. And I often approached it even at lunch. I considered myself still being interviewed. It was intended to see how you kind of did in the social situation. When we ask for feedback on our forms, we have to provide feedback for our candidates. One of the questions they always ask us is, do you think this person would be a good representative for our institution? How would they represent themselves at a conference, meetings and things like that? So you have to, I feel you always have to be prepared. I never let my guard down. I always felt that I was on the clock. I was being evaluated and I wanted to behave appropriately and, not get too relaxed. I've been in interviews where I've seen people really kick back and I was really surprised, like I understand that you get tired, but you're still in an interview, so, and sometimes they get maybe a little like punchy or something and they'll just start saying all kinds of things and you think, wow, this is not very professional, right? You're still at an interview. So I always remind myself that you're, be prepared for a long day. You're at an interview, and you have to remember that they're going to ask you different questions from different perspectives. So the questions you get from your, technical services folks are going to be different than your circulation folks, right? So they're going to have different perspectives for you.
Yeah, that's good to know and to think about because it's daunting, but yeah.
Oh, there's one thing I thought of that I would say, which is for me personally, it would be very hard to take a job without physically visiting the place. So we did a lot of hiring during the pandemic. And it was interesting when we came back, we'd have meetings, prepping, and we'd talk about, okay, on fourth floor, blah, 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 whatever, right? And then a colleague would say, I've never been on campus. They would have worked maybe for a year. And so they had no idea what we were talking about. And we'd say, oh, of course, right, I forgot, right? Like we haven't been in the building. So that was always interesting to me. I thought how challenging for them and how brave too, that they took a position not knowing the full, like the full layout of where they'd even be or what their office was going to look like. So that's a challenge for me. And I think we have folks, we do a lot of Zoom interviews, but I think it's kind of now going to start moving if they can. Well, depending on travel expenses, it's nice for folks, right, to be able to interview on Zoom and then potentially come in for an in-person session. But I think that's changed. That's changed a lot since pre-pandemic. We always had people on campus all day presenting in one of our rooms. So that was a really big change.
Yeah, like as somebody who is potentially willing to move for work, like you look at all these different places and you kind of have to be like, well, I don't know what it's like to be here. I guess you would have to wait till you hear back to even think about checking it out, I guess, because otherwise you would be just road tripping everywhere. But
right.
Yeah, no, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, does anyone else have any questions about anything that we haven't covered yet?
I have a question for all of you. I always like to ask questions in my meetings, which is, what have you most appreciated about your experience in the program? What has been most valuable to you?
Well, just speaking for myself, I think that, so like when you first get into the program, like in the high school, you have to take like Info 200, like all those like early level classes. And then one of the, I think it was 204, we were split into small groups, and we had to rate our leadership ability. And the instructor had to message everyone and be like, nobody rated themselves as a leader. Like, she's like, I get that you're all introverts, but like you kind of have to you have to be a leader in some way. And actually Anthony and I, who was in the meeting with, we both were like co-leaders for a small group presentation. And like since then, and since having to like, and since joining groups like Slask, I feel way more confident being a leader, whatever that means, than I did like 2 years ago, basically, or a year and a half ago. And like I used to still had to do like virtual meetings and stuff before, but I'd be a little timid about it or whatever. And now it's like, not that it's always easy, but it's a lot easier, and a lot more confident, and maybe those like soft skills on top of other things than maybe before.
Yeah, following up on Lauren's thought is basically leadership skills. It's very, very important. And when I joined the program, so when you join, you don't know anything about the courses offered. So the advisor was very, very helpful. Our advisor, Sheila Gurtu here, all my thanks to her. She's been fantastic with us. And our librarian as well was very, very helpful at guiding us for, especially in the first semester, everything was more challenging. And then later on throughout the semester, throughout the program, everything starts to settle down a little bit. You get used to it. It's good. But I really appreciated a lot the encouragement of Sheila Gurtu, of the advisor, of the librarian, of all our peers, helping us achieve goals and become a leader. So that was very, very helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other thoughts? What you've like really enjoyed, appreciated?
I'm happy to share. Sorry, I've been off camera with my family this evening. But I would say that the flexibility, of course, of the program and the breadth of the offerings of the program have both been beneficial to me. And the faculty who have really put a lot into their courses have been great. I mentioned that OER course that I took during the summer, and that actually, even though it was a 1-unit course, has been one of the best courses I've taken in the high school.
Who was the instructor for that?
Stephen Bell.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. He's like a big name in OER. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
remember
so go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah. No, I was just gonna say we did a presentation once and we're like, oh my gosh. It was like it was yeah. He's a big.
Yeah, I would agree with Marissa. The definitely the course offerings. That's why I picked this program to begin with. All the different pathways, I think, is really great. And I know it's kind of hard to just pick 42 credits. There's a lot more that I would want to take. And the enthusiasm of professors too. I've had some really some professors that are yeah, I've learned a lot. And the flexibility being online is definitely a plus too. So
I agree with the number of courses offered here. We are terribly humbled by the richness of the program, with many career pathways offered, many courses, and excellent teachers. We have amazing instructors
Yeah,
Like,
kind of piggybacking on that is I graduated in May and then I re-enrolled to get a post-grad certificate just because I'm like, if I could just take all the 284 classes, I would, but it caps out at 12 units. So getting that post-grad certificate allowed me to take more of those classes that I was really interested in.
I remember
And
wanting to do that too.
yeah, there was a lot that I couldn't take. And so, some of them weren't offered. Like I'm taking the medieval manuscripts class this semester with Dr. Main. It wasn't offered the whole time I was in the program. And then it became available and I'm like, yes, sorry. I was really excited. And
That sounds
I have to
awesome.
say it is. It's interesting. I'm looking forward to her other courses that she's going to teach. I think history of the books is going to be available in spring. And I think the student groups here are very, very active. And they definitely have great programming like tonight. And they share a lot of great resources, which is great. So I think that's another great facet of the SJSU program.
That reminded me of another question. As an employee, a tenured employee of SJSU, what are the perks? Do you get do you have a discount to take other classes or, I don't know. I got in my head at some point that you could have reduced tuition for family members if you were tenured.
That's actually true. I don't think you have to be tenured. I believe you just can be staff or faculty. I don't think tenure is required to get discount in courses. And that tends to be true actually about other institutions. So I know when I was at Santa Clara University, for example, folks were they were staff and academic. So at Santa Clara, they had academic status, they called it. And those individuals that had kids that were coming up and getting ready to think about going to college, they had, I forget what they called exactly, but it was like, well, there's tuition remission, which I think is fairly common at most institutions, which is you have a reduced rate or reduced cost of your classes. And then they also had an exchange program. So, for example, at Santa Clara University, being part of the AJCU, which was the Jesuit College University, they actually would swap. So, for example, if a staff member had a student that wanted to go someplace, and that student, and then someone else from that institution wanted to come to Santa Clara, they could swap. And so, but some of them were quite impacted and very popular, right? But that's an opportunity. So I will say that I think probably the great benefit for me is that actually you're considered permanent once you achieve tenure as a tenure track. So you're considered probationary until you so 6 years you're probationary until you achieve tenure, and then you become a permanent faculty member. And that comes with, so now I was a senior assistant and now I'm associate librarian. And then after 5 years, if I wanted to, I think I have to go through a full review in 5 years. That's a post-tenure review. But after that point, 5 years or more, you're welcome to apply to go up for full librarian. So that would be equivalent to professor. So our naming conventions are very similar, right? So so right now, assistant professor is the equivalent to a senior assistant librarian. Associate professor and associate librarian would be like the equivalents. And it lets you know that someone has achieved tenure. And then professor and librarian indicate that they have achieved full. So we do have, let's see, one of the perks is now I get to sit on different committees that I couldn't before. So now I get to review dossiers for my colleagues that are going up for tenure. So that's kind of interesting. And then, of course, you have, just as an educational institution, you get different discounts, right? So that's kind of fun. But yeah, so it's definitely, I think a few of my colleagues have gone through San Jose State for different graduate programs. So it's definitely something to think about. It's a perk.
I think of a lot of LIS folks are like lifelong learners, and it's very hard to stop and be like, I'm done. Yeah, especially when you're like, oh,
Yeah.
but there's so much more to learn, but I guess that's why there are conferences and such too.
Yeah. I always tell myself, I hope I never lose that desire to keep learning, right? I hope that's one of the things that I really enjoy working with my students is I think that's probably like my single most fun thing to do is get research questions. They have so many different research questions. And so sometimes you really have to go down an area, kind of dig in the literature, like, well, I have not thought about that. And what are the best terms to search in this area? So it's a lot of fun. And I'm someone though that could be online and I just drop into the rabbit hole, right? Like I just click on so many different links and I'm just digging around looking for information. I always tell my students, I know it's not necessarily fun for them, but I'm a total like research info geek. I also like mysteries and detective. So for me, I think my job is a little bit like information detection. So I'm constantly feeling like trying to solve a puzzle. And that's what is appealing to me. That's what I like about it. And each day is different. I will say that it's pretty different. I don't do necessarily the same thing every single day. But that's kind of nice. Keep some variety in the job.
I
And I just have
because
one.
Go ahead.
Sorry, just one thing I wanted to say. I just wanted to say I really like looking at Katie's tabby friends in the back there. Thanks for letting them be on screen.
I have the same cage in my kitchen, so I have some guinea pigs as well, so it's pretty fun.
But I'm sorry, Lauren, I interrupted you, please.
No, it's okay. What was I gonna say? Oh, so I think we were saying that a lot of because you teach like one and done type workshops, and a lot of them are at the beginning of the year. Are there other instructional workshops throughout the semester, or is it pretty much mostly just at the beginning, and then you prepare for then you do your other duties, and then you do it again in the next semester?
So it really depends on your discipline. My psychology, for whatever reason, department, they really like front loading. So I think second week I did 6 instruction sessions in a week, which is I did 4 in one day. That starts to get to be. I try not to do more than 3 because you do tire a little bit, but then you think this instructor has 4 classes. So I kind of feel like, well, if she's doing it, I feel like I have to do it. She's having to do it, 2 times a week, day in, day out. So it depends on the discipline. Some of my other colleagues, they're like October's really their heavy time to do instruction. I'm pretty much going to be wrapped up by, I think, next week, the 19th. And then I have 3 Econ 1Bs in October, and that's it for me. So I'm almost done by usually week 6, whereas a lot of my colleagues will be going into perhaps even early November. So it's very discipline specific. It just depends on the discipline. And it's a challenge if you're a tenure track because your dossier, so my colleagues who are working on preparing their dossiers, they're actually due at the end of September. So it's a very stressful time to be working on your dossier when you have the start of school and instruction and things. So last year when I did it, I tried to do a lot of work in the summer because I knew that the first 6 weeks of the school year were really, you feel like you don't have a lot of time. All you're going to be doing is focusing on incoming questions from students, incoming questions from faculty. It's the start of the new year, so we have lots of questions about textbooks. Sometimes students also, by the way, they're a little confused over what the bookstore and what the library does. And so they'll sometimes transfer students too, depending on what their institution, how their institution helped them with obtaining textbooks. Sometimes they come to the library thinking they can buy materials there. Sometimes they go to the bookstore. It just, they get a little bit confused. So at the start of the school year, there's a lot of trying to make sure everyone's in the right queue where they need to be, sorting a lot of different things out. Yeah, I was saying today, I felt like for every email I sent, it feels like two more were generated. You know, it's like, oh, I'm so happy. I'm going to take this thing to do item off my list, and two more things ended up on my plate. But it's fine. That's one thing I think I have to let go of, is I tend to like to be. I make a lot of lists, and I feel like, oh, I really want to get all this done by the end of the day. But realistically, sometimes, okay, I'm gonna have to come in tomorrow. I'm gonna have to keep working on this. So there's always things to work on. That's the thing for me. There's always things to do.
I had one other question, sorry.
Sure.
Regarding the experience, do you think it would be better to do a shorter like internship in different places? Or like I think that there is a like more of a technical job, or like not a job that doesn't require to be have an MLIS at an academic library that I've been toying with the idea of, but I think that would be like a full-time position. So then I couldn't like spend time in an archive or like a different kind of library setting, which makes me a little scared to like just jump into this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think it would be good? I don't know. What do you think of having just going straight into an academic library versus doing smaller internships to gain experience in different kinds of environments?
So if do you definitely want to go into an academic library, or are you still thinking about it?
I'm pretty sure. I'm definitely interested in archives as well. That's the one thing that I would like to get a little experience, I think, in both before going all in on academic, but so far I'm leaning that way right now.
Yeah, I would say probably I would want to do sort of a sampling menu. I want to try to do different internships before I really. It's great that you would have a full-time position, but you also don't want to lock yourself down immediately if you still want to sort of sample what's out there and try different paths, career pathways. So I would say lean more into doing a variety of internships, if you can. If you feel like, well, I really like the stability of a full-time job, and and you think you'd be really happy in that environment, then you could go for that. Just depends on what kind of flexibility you have. But I prefer the idea of being able to try out many different areas before settling on one.
Well, it looks like I think people are getting ready to hop off. Unless you have anything else you wanted to say, I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us tonight.
Well, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions and support in the chat. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. If you ever want me to come back and do like a presentation just on OER, I'd be happy just to do, like I have a ton of slides, as you can tell. I could just put something together just on OER, just on ALS. It's a little, I wasn't sure like what would I put on a slide for, academic librarianship, because it tends to just sort of be, it's a hard thing to wrap your arms around, right? So I was hoping that tonight could be more like a conversation, like a fireside chat. So. But if you want, I'm happy to come back with something more definitive around like OER or ALS or anything like that. And I did take notes on those things. I certainly will try to track down. And then I guess I could share them with you, Lauren, those those pieces of information?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, great. Okay, great.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, no, really appreciate it again. Thanks everyone who came tonight, and yeah, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you
have a
very
great
much,
week. Thank
Krista.
you.
Thank you
Thank
very much,
you.
Lauren,
Take
for
care.
organizing this.
Yes, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Lauren.